Welcome to the Austin Forum Upload, the podcast of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society.
Every episode, we upload for you the expertise, insights, and opinions of thought leaders, innovators, and creators on topics at the intersection of technology and society.
We'll cover pervasive and emerging technologies that are influencing and impacting our business, education, governments, research, and culture.
I'm Jay.
I'm Jessica.
And I'm John.
And we're the co-producers of the Austin Forum Upload. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the Austin Forum Upload. I'm Jay Boisseau, the Executive Director and Founder of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society, and I'm here with my co-host.
My name is Jessica Sager, and I am the Managing Director at the Austin Forum on Technology and Society.
And we're very excited to have this fun episode in which we're going to talk about UFOs and unexplained aerial phenomena. This has been in the news a lot lately. This is going to be a more scientific and objective look at this fun topic. And we're very pleased to have a special guest. He comes to the Austin Forum events in person a lot, and he's a longtime friend and my advisor for my PhD thesis in astronomy, Craig Wheeler. Craig, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm J. Craig Wheeler, the Samuel T. and Fern Yanagasawa Regents Professor of Astronomy Emeritus at the University of Texas at Austin.
So I'm super pleased to have you on this podcast today, Craig. Thanks for joining us. This is always one of those fun topics that as an astronomy student, you know you're studying physics and science and you're supposed to be appropriately skeptical, but I couldn't help but love the occasional class where we talked about the possibilities of life beyond Earth. And of course, that has come up a lot in the news lately with all these released reports about, I guess the government calls them unexplained aerial phenomena, or UAPs. Mm-hmm. People more commonly referred to it as unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. And are those terms pretty interchangeable?
No. And you've already concatenated a couple of things, which of course is a very natural thing to do. But we're all interested in knowing whether there's life out there, whether we're alone, are there aliens out there, all those kinds of questions. And there are unidentified aerial phenomena. But the question of whether those two topics overlap is, one of the subjects. And I think, speaking as a scientist, one has to carefully separate those at some level. Maybe they overlap, but while we're having this discussion, we need to differentiate them.
Great.
And I really appreciate the fact that the government is now, in all its wisdom, is calling these unidentified aerial phenomena rather than unidentified flying objects, because we don't exactly know they're flying.
Exactly. Yeah.
We do know they're objects. I even wonder, I'm not terribly skeptical. I think this is a fascinating topic. I think we really need to understand what unidentified aerial phenomena are. I mean, it's a really valid, human question. It's a valid scientific question. We really need to understand what they are. But I even, trying to be as skeptical as possible, I wonder about the word aerial. Suppose it's something not in somebody's brain, a Navy pilot's brain, but something nearby. Fluctuation in something around the aircraft or something. Does that make it aerial? Probably. But I think it's important to separate the vocabulary and separate the ideas and not mush them together too arbitrarily. I wanted to say a word about my history, if I could, in this. Because as an astronomer, I'm interested in the question of life out there and all that. And I'm certainly not an expert in unidentified aerial phenomenon, but I have pondered it for a very long time. So the thing I was going to show you, which I will do, I will show you and Jessica, that the people won't be able to see it, was I was a graduate student. There was a book that came out, Scientific Study of Unidentifying Flying Objects. Written by a guy, professor at physics at the University of Colorado by the name of Edward Condon. And he had been the head of something called Project Blue Book, which was, back in the 60s, the version of what the government is doing now. So they've been doing it for a very long time. And so in some sense, there's nothing new under the sun, although people are more rigorous. And it also says, it's got a dedication on it. For Craig Wheeler, no supernovae here. signed by Ed Condon in March of 1969. I'm dating myself here. So I've pondered these things for a long time. And whether that gives me any expertise or not, I don't know. But I've got some perspective on it.
I'm curious. So since you just picked up that book from 1963, so if that book was written today, what are some of the things that are available now? I mean, in addition to what we're seeing in the news, like that weren't available then in terms of technology and being able to answer the question?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things come to mind. And again, I'm not really an expert, so I'm bluffing my way through this. There are now these Navy pilots and film recordings of things that are reasonably objective, whereas so much of the UFOlogy, if I can call that, is anecdotal and individuals and hard to verify. And I think that's still a problem. That is, how do you quantify this phenomenon? And even with the Navy pilot reports, they're scattered. There's only a few. You can't do the kind of observation you would like to do. You can't do the kind of experiment you would like to do in this quick anecdotal phenomenological thing. And that just makes it a hard topic to try to turn it into a real piece of science.
So what do you think is spurring all of this public interest now and this seemingly, I don't want to say realistic, but more credible interest in the topic? I mean, we have declassified some reports recently. We've seen some video that I guess has been released, and we've seen interviews with, seemingly credible people. Is it really just the release of information that has been there for a while, but it's been a sudden and recent release of stuff that has spurred the new public interest?
Well, that's why I flashed the Condon book at you. This has been around for a long time. And yeah, I think the current interest is because there's a current report. And then it gets picked up and President Obama comments on it and people pick up on that. So, I think it's one of these things that just kind of comes every once in a while while attention focuses. But I must say that having the Navy pilots talk credibly about what they saw and how puzzled they were, that's a real thing that requires some attention. On the other hand, you got to be careful about the way they're describing this and parsing it. And even President Obama, I'll come back to that. But they're saying some things that are truly unidentified aerial phenomena. So they are saying there's some things we can't figure out. But one has to keep in mind that the vast majority are figured out. They're airplanes, they're cloud formations, they're Venus, so the vast majority of things one can explain. So you kind of winnow those all out. It's the things that you can't explain that are clearly interesting.
Well,
and when a Navy pilot then, I'm sorry, Jessica, let me just finish that thought. When a Navy pilot says, I saw it, I filmed it, there's something really strange going on, that is kind of new. But there are reports of pilots seeing things, in the Blue Book report. It's been around for a long time.
Well, I think that brings up an interesting point too. So as a scientist, how would you encourage people to listen and read the reports and articles? So we're seeing so much in the media now, partially because of the news cycle and everything. So what are the filters? What should people be thinking about when they're seeing these things?
Aha, I'm glad you asked. And that doesn't mean to stop, Jay. I'm just waving my finger. One of the things you have to keep an eye out for when anybody says, I saw an object, and this includes Navy pilots, and I am in awe of Navy pilots. This isn't a criticism of all. The fact they can land those aircraft on a pitching aircraft carrier, I can't believe it. But to say I saw something that was this big and that far away, you should immediately throw red flags at that. Because as an astronomer, we know, and you can apply this in other things, particularly as an astronomer, you cannot go outside and look up at the sky at the stars and figure out how far away they are. You can't even figure out this star is closer than that star. It's really hard. And we have spent our whole 10,000 year profession of astronomers figuring out how to do that, figuring out how far away things are. So anytime you say an object was this far above the ground, or was at that altitude, or it was that distance, or it was that big, it's really hard to know that. So you've got to you got to step back and say, well, what do we know about that? What does that person know about it? And I'm intrinsically skeptical of those kind of claims. And then, where you go from there, I don't know. But as a person just trying to keep these things straight, I'd be really careful about statements about how big things are and how far away things are and what altitude they're at. So
Yeah, you bring up a couple of really good points there. One is that the vast majority of these incidents have been explained, and the ones that make the news are the ones that are not currently explained. And rarely do they make the news if later they are explained. So it's a small subset of these aerial phenomena that are classified as such that we don't know the answer, and they seems to be something weird. And as you said, the eyes can deceive. You can think something is small and close that is actually large and far away, and that changes the aspects of not just its size and distance, but its relative motion and things like that. The eyes can play tricks on you, and of course there's reflections, and there's glass involved in cockpits, and there's atmospheric issues and all of this. So unexplained doesn't mean unnatural.
Exactly. Yeah. Unexplained does not mean unnatural. The other aspect to that is, and this is, not honestly statement, I haven't read this current report. I thought it wasn't actually out until another few weeks now. Didn't I read? Anyway, I haven't read it. And I've seen some of the Navy videos briefly. But one of the things they don't say, and they are not going to say explicitly, is there are surely classified things out there that are seen by people. And the government is not going to say anything about it. Thank you very much. So they say we don't understand what these are. They are, subsuming a category of things that are hyper secret, and they know what they are, and they know, that Navy pilot saw one of those, but we're not talking about those. That people were flying stealth aircraft for a decade more before those became public. And
Right.
and that was 30 years ago. What in the world has the Pentagon been doing since then? And I'm sure it's a lot. I don't know what it is. It's secret. I don't have the classified. So there's this category of, if the government. So this is also new in the recent report. The specificity by which they are saying, we know classified stuff. And these things we're telling you we haven't been able to identify, they're not that. We're not going to tell you about the classified stuff. We're just telling you this is not some classified thing that even we don't know what it is. So that makes it more interesting. And that's a bit more definitive statement than I think we've seen in the past. I guess the other thing that, while I'm on a slight roll here, coming back to President Obama's comment that there are things we don't understand. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like that. There surely are, but that doesn't mean they're aliens. It just means we don't understand it. And the other important thing about that is you can't prove a negative. Eventually someone might be able to prove that there are aliens if it's a positive thing. But if unidentified aerial phenomena are not aliens, no one is going to be able to prove that. You can't prove a negative. So you kind of have to keep that in mind as well while you're contemplating all of this.
But that brings up a question I wanted to ask. So if people don't know, then they're going to make assumptions. So what are the options? What are the various things people should be thinking about in terms of different options for explaining the currently unexplained aerial phenomena?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a really concrete answer to that. But in thinking about this in general, before Jay raised the question of doing this podcast, and Jay's mentioned this already, things like reflections and stuff. Now, it can't just be a casual reflection, I think. But again, I don't know exactly how this works. But you see these Navy films, and you see what the camera sees. And you also have the pilot statement. I saw this thing. So you've got, two different statements about this unidentified phenomenon. But I don't know how the camera works. Is the pilot is the camera projecting something on the screen that the pilot's seeing at the same time, or does he really have an independent line of sight on whatever this object is? And I just don't know, but it still leaves open the possibility that it is some kind of aerial phenomenon of some weird kind, ball lightning. I mean, we've been through that for 60 years, and I don't think it's ball lightning particularly. But whether it is some kind of reflection or aerial phenomenon that is dancing around in some way and giving you the impression that it's moving very fast or ducking under the ocean or something, without really getting a grips on the data, it's hard to say. But that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about, is some kind of a phenomenon. I mean, when you have an airplane flying towards you, and it looks like it's some light in the sky. It's doing its crosswind, and then it turns downwind or upwind, I guess, to land. But the beams of that airplane are pointed at you, and all it has to do is change its angle the tiniest little bit, and bam, it winks out, and it gives you, whoa, something really fast happened. And no, it just changed its direction a little bit. There's nothing magic about it at all. So some kind of phenomenon like that is where my mind kind of goes, but I can't say, okay, I know exactly how that's going to work in a way that explains what some Navy pilot has said. But here's another thought. What is it about Navy pilots? And again, coming back to the point that I'm in awe of them, but why is it Navy pilots? I'm asking myself, and I'm being a little facetious, but not entirely. They fly over the water. Is there something about some ocean air interface that creates these phenomena? And then it's the Navy pilots that are flying over the San Diego Bay, and they're the ones that see it, because the Air Force pilots are flying over Nevada or something where you don't see it. It may be that Air Force pilots also see them, or commercial pilots. I think there are examples of that.
There are some examples of that, but you're right. The most recent ones have been over water.
But I'm trying to sort of illustrate for Jessica kind of where my mind goes with this, to take all these various little bits and clues and see whether they fit into some pattern. And I don't have an answer for it. That's just where my scientist mind goes. One other thing, I have a few notes here. I'll get through all of them, and we'll go back to your questions again. Another is coming back to the unidentified flying objects and question of whether they're aliens or not. Just a background issue, but which still dominates my mind at some level, is astronomers look out there at everything we can look at with every technique we have: X-rays, gamma rays, radio, ultraviolet, infrared, optical light, neutrinos, every vehicle we can think of. And there is not a hint of anything macroscopic alien flying around in flying saucers like that. That we have a standing joke, if there's some unknown phenomenon, it's probably a Klingon battleship, but it's never turned out to be a Klingon battleship. So maybe it'll turn out to be someday. I'm just saying that astronomers study the universe with every wit and technique we have. There's not a hint. Why there's not anything out there obvious to see is one of the mysteries that we debate, the Drake equation and all of that. We don't have to go into that, but it's rather a mystery that we seem to be alone.
Actually, I was hoping you would bring up the Drake equation, because when I took one of my very first undergraduate astronomy classes at the University of Virginia, and Bob Rood was teaching that class.
Yeah. Oh, Bob would do a great job with it.
That's right. He was one of the co-authors of that book, and I can't quite remember the title, but it was about SETI. And it was all about the Drake equation and all the astronomy and everything that we knew at that time to try to assign rough values to all of it. And for the listeners, the Drake equation is this equation that estimates the number of current intelligent communicating civilizations in the galaxy. And there were a lot of adjectives in there. And the equation was structured around, okay, well, let's start with the number of stars in the galaxy, and then let's whittle it down, the fraction that form planets, the fractions that have planets in the continuously habitable zone, the fraction for which the star lives long enough for life to evolve on the planet over a few billion years, the fraction that the life there evolves to be intelligent, the fraction that of the intelligent life that isn't dolphins but becomes something that builds tools, and the fraction that desires to communicate. And then, of course, does it blow itself up? What's the lifetime of that civilization? And back when I took that class in 19 long time ago, the answer was often one, because of how astronomers assign those variables. And yet since then, we found evidence that we were probably wrong in our conservative estimates for how many stars have planets and how many planets are in continuously habitable zones and things like that. So most people, it seems like with the Drake equation, they kind of think the answer might be greater than one. Now, there might be other such, or at least statistically, scientifically, doesn't mean we can detect them yet. Doesn't mean they're visiting us for sure. But it seems like people are starting to warm to the idea that there's life elsewhere and maybe intelligent life elsewhere.
Perhaps, but the Drake equation gets harder and harder as you go. That was a wonderful recitation of it, by the way, spontaneously. We do know now that how many stars there are roughly in the galaxy. Yep. We now know, which we didn't 20 years ago, that almost all of those stars have planets. It's been an amazing revolution in the astronomy game. How many of them are around the habitable zone, and still a little dicey, but people are working on that. That's much more solid now, those first factors in the Drake equation. And there's not to trivialize that at all. But then by the time you get to, how long does it take to evolve, and when do you invent tools, and do you kill yourself, and do you want to communicate? You start to get into not just sociological issues, you get into alien sociological issues, and then it's then it gets very tough. So I think I don't know, people are hopeful. Astronomers mostly think there's going to be microbes out there. I think most of us are agnostic on whether there's intelligent aliens like us. Their technology is probably so advanced beyond ours that it would be magic to us. We wouldn't recognize it. My particular fantasy is they've learned how to function in higher dimensional space, the way string theory talks about, and they wouldn't bother sending radio signals through ordinary 3D space. That's crazy, any more than we communicate with drums anymore, right? We have fiber optic cables. We don't use drums or smoke signals anymore. So it may be something like that. They're just their technology is far beyond us. They have ways of communicating. They're all over the place. It's just we don't have the means to and the wits to detect them. Not one fantasy possibility. Another possibility is they're robots, that in order to get off their planet, they had to merge with their robots, and they're tiny little things, and we don't recognize them when we see them. And then the ancillary question is, are we going to become space travelers someday? And if so, are we going to have to merge with our machines and become robots ourselves by the time we get off this planet in a major sort of way and start filling the galaxy, which we aspire to do?
Well, I don't think we said it in the intro of the podcast. We talked about it before we started, but Craig, you're also a science fiction author as well. And so as you shared some of those possibilities there, your natural long career as being a scientist makes you appropriately skeptical. But if you had to write a science fiction book about an alien civilization coming to Earth, would you pick the option it's here to help us, eat us, enslave us, or destroy us?
Yes.
That would be the big
all
four.
of them.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I'm temporizing a little bit, but one of my favorite movies of all time is still The Day the Earth Stood Still, and the alien guy and that robot. I still just love him to pieces. And he was here to say, clean up your act, or we'll clean it up for you. And so it was kind of a mix of beneficial things and a threat. Don't play nicely. We're just you're out of here. I think if I were to write a story about that, because it merges into, and Jay, this, but just to go ahead and give it a plug, I'm writing a book on the future of humanity And the question of where we're going with artificial intelligence, robots, and brain-computer interfaces, and things like CRISPR-Cas9 that allow us to alter our own biology, all that is going to take us in a new way faster than we think. And a question of whether we end up being part machine or all machine or something a million years from now, I don't know. But I think that the prospect of a machine evolution is high enough that it would capture my imagination as a writer, and to try to capture that in some way. And then, I guess that's another thought I've had in the past, coming back to the question of aliens and sociology, of maybe they don't care about us, they're any more than we care about an anthill, and we're out there tromping around in the woods, and we're not paying much attention to whether we're stepping on an ant or a bug of some kind. And so, they could be around occasionally, and just, we're so immaterial to them that they don't care. They don't care whether they help us or hurt us. They're just doing their thing, and we might or might not get in the way. They're going to put a super highway right through the earth, and it just happens to be in the way. And so the dolphins have enough sense to get out of there. Thanks for all the fish, but if you can't do that, you're in trouble. I wish I had the wits to write a book like that. I mean, Douglas Adams is amazing.
Well, I'm curious too, because given your background and your expertise in this, is there a best question or conspiracy theory somebody's asked you, or tried to convince you of? Not convince you.
Yeah, I guess the simple answer to that, Jessica, is no. I haven't had the pleasure of talking to too many conspiracy-minded people.
Oh man, okay. I'm sure we can find you some.
Oh no, I
have a debate. I have a podium. We can have debates.
I know they're out there. I fret about it. I think it's kind of I have fears that the dangers of undoing democracy. I think that's a
valid,
a real fear, and what we do about that, I don't know. Talk about it, expose it.
Got it. Well,
and the UFO thing is a little bit like that, right? You can get into this. I'm sure the government's hiding a eviscerated alien in Area 51 sort of thing. It's a little bit of the same psychology. And Carl Sagan addressed that, sort of talking about that kind of thing, believing in UFOs and whether they're aliens or not. And what the version of that sort of thing was 300 years ago, when it was angels doing things rather than aliens doing things. It's been part of the human psychology for a long time. That's not to demean human psychology. That's part of our imagination and how we think about things, and then end up inventing new things and all this. So it can have its downsides sometimes.
Well, do you think that as we go forward in time, that some of these UAPs, these unexplained aerial phenomena that are currently unexplained, and I don't mean, as you pointed out, the vast majority of these things get explained, but there's a subset that clearly aren't yet.
They're truly unexplained.
Do you think they will fall into the category of 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now, we have explanations? And I think back to the days when I was a little kid and reading about the Bermuda Triangle and thinking there was something weird about this place and it was bizarre and whatnot. Of course, in hindsight, it turns out there was nothing. You grow up, you study science, but technology advances, GPS advances, the resiliency of all the onboard instruments advances, and suddenly nothing's disappearing in this so-called Bermuda Triangle anymore. And people realize, oh, better ships, better navigation, better communication, nothing disappears, nothing weird at all going on. Do you think that the sensors will improve in such a way? And do you think that there'll be efforts to improve these sensors to try to explain these UAPs? Obviously, we have radar and things like that to detect enemy aircraft and things like that. But is there any effort going into trying to understand UAPs and the different sensing techniques you might want to use to understand?
I'd kind of put my physicist hat on again. So, I mean, these recent reports are all coming out of the Pentagon, and I guess that's appropriate. But part of me would say, and this is nothing against the Pentagon either, but it seems to me there is a problem of physics here.
Mm-hmm.
And that one should then sit down as a basic scientist and say, what are the facts in front of me? What do I need to do to understand that better? And do experiments. I don't exactly know what you do. You go in with a new airplane every day and fly the same path that the Navy pilot did and see whether you see it again under the same circumstance. I mean, they're just rigorous ways of going about it, of doing it scientifically. And I would love to see a program like that. Somebody's got to fund it. There's where the government comes in. But I think, combining some physicists and some atmospheric scientists and whatever, biologists, I don't know, whatever kind, oceanographers,
maybe, yeah.
And letting them try to pose what the actual, what do we know and what do we need to know to advance that? I'd love to see that. And I think some of these unexplained things would then fall into the explained category if you did that.
I like that solution. I think it should be a multi-domain approach to understanding it. That'd be great.
Yeah, you just, I've got some mysterious thing I want to understand. Well, okay, we have something called the scientific method, which is turned out to be pretty effective in doing things like that. So let's use it.
And which about half our country believes in. So that's
that's an issue. But the three of us here do, and
that's right.
Our audience does, and we know it's an effective way of going about things.
Yeah.
So one final question today, and we really appreciated this conversation and getting to hear and learn from you. And we've talked around it, but I want to ask you, so what do you think the UAPs are? The documented ones, the ones that are from credible sources, what do you think they are? Martians. Sorry.
Yeah, I think they are probably some kind of atmospheric reflection phenomenon that makes them look like they're behaving strangely when they're really not that strange. Again, if you see something reflecting and you see it reflecting here, and then conditions change a little bit and you see it reflecting over here, it's going to look like it jumped very rapidly when it wasn't. There's a technical phrase of a phase velocity versus a group velocity, and I would guess it's some kind of a phase velocity phenomenon. But that a Navy pilot could say, up your phase. I mean, I saw what I saw, right? So that's just squeaking out of it. But that's where my thinking goes, that it's some kind of a knowable phenomenon.
I'm glad to hear you say that. That's sort of my hunch as well, that it's atmospheric. I love your characterization of it as a phase velocity versus group velocity thing, because I can give an apparent velocity that is much greater and thus can be perceived as, wow, what's going on? That's faster than anything I've ever seen before or imagined. But I suspect it's something like that too. But I love your idea of assembling a team of scientists with different expertise to try to understand it. Well, Craig, thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you so much.
You've been a podcast guest before, and I always love having you on, and look forward to your book on the future of humanity, and can't wait to talk to you about that and maybe have you present something about that at one of our in-person events as well. Look forward to reading it most of all, but thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. I appreciate you letting me spout out on this. I didn't realize I had many thoughts on it until I started thinking about it.
Well, I've certainly been asked about it an awful lot because of the PhD I got under your guidance in astronomy, and everybody thinks I have an opinion on this. And I'm like, I wasn't there. I wasn't in the plane. I didn't see the aerial phenomena.
Well, and I still have that handicap. I have never seen anything that would constitute an unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Forum Upload. You can listen to additional episodes and check out a schedule of our monthly in-person events at austinforum.org. The Upload is a production of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society, a nonprofit organization here in Austin, Texas.